It was 3 in the morning when my life changed forever. I was asleep when suddenly I felt a presence in the room. It wasn't fear, it was something different, a peace I had never felt before. And then I saw him. Saint Maximilian Kolbe stood at the foot of my bed, wearing the Franciscan habit, with that serene gaze I only knew from old photographs. But now, he was there, real, breathing. Have you ever felt like your entire life was crumbling? That no matter how much you pray, how much you try, God simply doesn't hear you? That's exactly how I felt. For months, my faith was dead, completely dead. I still went to Mass out of habit, still prayed out of obligation, but inside I was empty, hollow, like an abandoned church, where only echoes of what was once sacred remain. And that night, when I least expected it, everything changed, because Saint Kolbe didn't just come to visit me, he came to wake me up. Let me tell you what really happened in that dark room, and why the next day, my life took a direction I never imagined possible. But first, I need you to understand who I was before that dream. My name is Michael. I'm 42 years old. I'm an accountant, a father of 2, the husband of a woman who deserved much more than I was giving her. On the outside, my life seemed perfect. House, car, financial security. But inside I was being consumed by a darkness no one could see. You know, that kind of crisis that has no name, that doesn't show up on a medical test, that you can't explain even to yourself. That's what was happening to me. I woke up every morning feeling like a ghost. I spent my days fulfilling obligations, smiling when necessary, answering fine when someone asked how I was. But the truth is, I hadn't been okay for a very long time. Prayer had become automatic, empty words that left my mouth without passing through my heart. I recited the Our Father like someone reciting a multiplication table, mechanical, soulless, and God seemed to have moved to a different address. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I shouted, but only heard the echo of my own voice. It was like trying to talk to a concrete wall. Have you ever been through this? Felt like your prayers hit the ceiling and come back unanswered? That's exactly how it was. And it was getting worse every day. Because when you lose faith, you don't just lose your connection with God. You lose your connection with yourself, with your family, with your reason for being. I was becoming a faded version of myself. My wife noticed. Of course she noticed. She tried to talk, but I avoided the subject. My children asked why I was always sad, and I lied, saying I was just tired. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father is losing his faith? How do you tell her that the man who should be the example of faith in the family can no longer feel God? You don't tell them. You simply carry that weight alone. And that's what I did for months. I carried that emptiness, that spiritual thirst that nothing could quench. Not the self-help books I bought in secret, not the conversations with the parish priest, not the novenas I prayed with more desperation than faith. Nothing worked. It was like trying to fill a leaky bucket. No matter how much water you pour, it always escapes. And then that Tuesday arrived, a normal day. Work, lunch, more work, back home, forced conversation at dinner, television, bath, bed. I lay down as usual, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the next day's problems, waiting for sleep. To arrive for at least a few hours of peace. I had no idea what was about to happen. I didn't know that night, Saint Kolbe had an appointment with me. I fell asleep around midnight, a heavy sleep, without dreams, or at least that's what I thought. Until 3 in the morning, something woke me up. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a nightmare, it was a sensation, as if someone had lit a warm light in the middle of the darkness. I opened my eyes slowly, still half asleep, and that's when I saw a figure stood at the foot of my bed. My first instinct was fear. Who wouldn't be scared? But when I managed to focus my vision, the fear simply evaporated. It was an elderly, thin man wearing a brown Franciscan habit. The face. The face I recognized immediately. I had seen that face so many times in old photographs, in books about World War II, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, the saint who gave his life for a father in Auschwitz, the man who transformed martyrdom into pure love. He was there, in my room, looking at me with those eyes full of compassion, and I knew, somehow I knew that this wasn't just a dream. Have you ever had an experience you can't explain logically, but that you know deep down in your heart is real? That goes beyond your comprehension, but that marks your soul forever. That's what was happening. St. Kolbe approached slowly. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with that serenity that only saints possess, as if he could see through me, as if he knew. Every wound, every doubt, every tear I had cried in silence. And then he smiled. It wasn't an ordinary smile. It was a smile that carried all the understanding in the world. A smile that said, I know what you're going through, and I'm here to help you. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. It was as if my body was heavy, but my soul completely light. And that's when he spoke. The voice was soft, but firm, carrying an authority that wasn't human. Michael, he said, and hearing my name being pronounced by that holy voice made me tremble inside. You have been looking for God in the wrong places. Your day seemed... What words were those? How did he know my name? How did he know about my struggle? But somehow, I wasn't asking myself those questions anymore. I was completely absorbed by his presence. You have been praying for signs, St. Kolbe continued, but you haven't been paying attention to the signs you've already received. And as he spoke, I began to feel something in my chest, a warmth, as if a very gentle fire was being lit right in the center of my heart. Your faith isn't dead, my son. It just fell asleep. And today is the day to wake it up. How could he know? How was it possible that this saint, who died decades ago, knew exactly what was happening in my soul? St. Kolbe extended his right hand towards me. In his palms, I could see the marks. They weren't open wounds, but they were visible. Like luminous scars, they told the story of his sacrifice. Give me your hand, he asked. I was trembling, not from fear, but from an emotion I couldn't name. It was as if all the anguish I'd carried for months was being sucked out of my body. I extended my hand, and when our fingers touched, my God, a wave of peace washed over me. From the tips of my toes to the crown of my head, it was as if every cell in my being was being cleansed by crystal clear water. All the doubts that tormented me simply vanished. All the emptiness that consumed me was instantly filled. It was as if someone had turned on the light after months of darkness. And then St. Kolbe began to speak again. But this time I felt as if he was speaking directly to my soul. Michael, you want to know why your faith grew cold? I couldn't speak. I just nodded yes, because you began to treat God like a waiter. You made requests and expected results. When the results didn't come, you concluded that God didn't exist. Every word was like an arrow striking the bullseye of truth. But God is not a waiter, my son. He is a father. And sometimes a father says no because he loves. Sometimes he allows pain because he knows it will strengthen you. Tears began to stream down my face. They were different tears. They weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of recognition, as if I had finally found the answer I'd been searching for so long. Do you want a sign that God loves you? St. Kolbe asked. Yes, I managed to whisper. So he pointed to the nightstand beside the bed. Look there. I turned my head and saw my wallet. Nothing unusual. The same wallet I left there every day. Open it, he said. I picked up the wallet with trembling hands. Inside, folded with the bills, was a piece of paper I had never seen before. It was a handwritten prayer, in a script I didn't recognize. Read it, St. Kolbe asked. I unfolded the paper, and what was written made me cry even harder. It was a prayer to St. Maximilian Kolbe, handwritten, signed with the name of my grandmother, who had died 10 years earlier. How had that paper ended up in my wallet? How was it possible? Your grandmother never stopped praying for you, St. Kolbe said with a smile, even after death. And today her prayers have been answered. I was sobbing. Years of pain, doubt, emptiness. Everything was pouring out through those tears. But I didn't just come to show you that God loves you, the saint continued. I came to give you a mission. A mission. You will wake up tomorrow as a new man. Your faith will be renewed. Your heart will be at peace. But this is not the end. It's the beginning. St. Kolbe moved even closer. Now I could feel his presence like pure energy. You will witness. You will tell what happened here. You will help other men who are going through the same crisis you went through. How? How could I do that? As if he could read my thoughts, he replied, in the same way that I am doing now, with love, with patience, showing that God never abandons his children, even when they think they have been abandoned. And then he did something that marked me forever. He placed his hand on my chest, right over my heart, and he recited a prayer in Latin. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. It was as if he were blessing me, preparing me for something greater. When he finished the prayer, he looked into my eyes one last time. When you wake up, you will find another sign, this time in your car, and you will know exactly what you need to do. Another sign? In my car? Don't be afraid, Michael. From today on, you will never walk alone. And then he began to fade away. Wait, I cried. Don't go yet. But St. Kolbe only smiled, that same smile full of understanding. I will never leave you, my son. From today on, you will carry me in your heart. And then a soft light enveloped his figure, and he simply disappeared. I remained there, sitting on the bed, holding that handwritten prayer from my grandmother, trying to process what had just happened. Had it been a dream, a vision, a hallucination? But the paper in my hand was real. The tears on my face were real, and above all, the peace in my heart was real. For the first time in months, I felt complete. I looked at the clock. It was 4:15 in the morning. I couldn't go back to sleep. How could I? My life had just completely changed. I stayed there, sitting on the bed, rereading that prayer from my grandmother, trying to understand how it had ended up in my wallet. And then I remembered St. Kolbe's words. When you wake up, you will find another sign, this time in your car. My heart pounded. What sign would that be? The hours passed slowly. I was anxious for dawn, anxious to discover what awaited me. My wife woke up at 6, as always. She looked at me and asked why I was awake so early. I couldn't sleep, I replied. And it was true, but not for the usual reasons. She looked at me more closely. You're different, she said, furrowing her brow. What do you mean? I don't know. Your face is calmer. It's been a long time since I've seen you like this. She was right. I felt different, completely different. I showered, got dressed, and left the house earlier than usual. I needed to get to my car. I needed to find out what the sign St. Kolbe had mentioned was. I walked to the garage with my heart beating fast. I opened the car door and on the passenger seat there was a book I had never seen before. It was a biography of St. Maximilian Kolbe, blue cover, well worn, as if someone had read it many times. I picked up the book with trembling hands. On the first page, there was a handwritten dedication to my grandson Michael. May he find in St. Kolbe the same strength that I found. With eternal love, Grandma Mary, my grandmother. It was her handwriting, no doubt about it. But how? When? And then I understood. The sign wasn't just the book. The sign was the absolute certainty that all of that was real, that my grandmother from heaven had interceded for me, that St. Kolbe had truly visited me. I sat in the driver's seat, holding that book, and cried like a child. They weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of gratitude, after so long feeling orphaned by God. I finally had the certainty that he had never abandoned me, that he was there all along, waiting for me to stop demanding and start trusting. I opened the book to a random page and read a sentence that made me tremble. The most powerful prayer is the one that comes from a broken heart, because it is in our emptiness that God finds space to dwell. That was it. That was exactly it. I had spent months trying to fill my emptiness with desperate prayers, with requests, with pleas. But what God wanted was precisely that emptiness, to be able to fill it with His presence. I sat there for several minutes, absorbing everything. St. Kolbe's visit, my grandmother's prayer, the book, the words echoing in my heart. And then I remembered the mission he had given me. You will testify. You will tell what happened here. You will help other men who are going through the same crisis you went through. How could I do that? Who would believe me? But then I understood that this wasn't my concern. My only responsibility was to be faithful to what had happened. The rest I would leave in God's hands. I drove to work with a completely new feeling. It was as if I was seeing the world with different eyes. The colors seemed more vibrant, the sounds sharper, even the air seemed different. Arriving at the office, I sat at my desk and looked at the computer screen. But instead of opening the usual spreadsheets, I opened a blank document and I started to write. I started to tell the story you are hearing now. The story of how St. Maximilian Kolbe visited a desperate accountant on a Tuesday morning and changed his life forever. But this is only the first part of the story, because what happened in the following days was even more extraordinary. The signs multiplied, the confirmations arrived in ways I never imagined, and the mission that St. Kolbe gave me began to take shape in ways that surprised me, because when God decides to act in someone's life, He doesn't do it halfway. For 3 days straight, I wrote compulsively. It was as if the words simply flowed through me, as if St. Kolbe were dictating every sentence. My colleagues started to notice the change. "Michael, you're different," they said, "more cheerful." And it was true. For the first time in years, I woke up eager to live the day, not out of obligation, but out of genuine pleasure. But it was on Thursday that the first really impactful sign happened. I was having lunch alone at a restaurant near the office, reading the book that had appeared in my car, a biography of St. Kolbe that I devoured as if it were water in the desert. Suddenly, an elderly gentleman approached my table. "Excuse me for bothering you," he said, "but I couldn't help. I couldn't. But notice the book you're reading." I looked up. He was a man of about 70 years old, with completely white hair and very vivid blue eyes. "Saint Maximilian Kolbe," he continued, "my favorite saint." I invited him to sit down. There was something about that encounter that didn't seem casual. "May I ask why you're reading about him?" the gentleman asked, settling into the chair opposite. And then something inexplicable happened. Words started coming out of my mouth, words I hadn't planned to say. I told him everything: the dream, the visit, my grandmother's prayer, the book that appeared in the car. Any normal person would have looked at me like I was crazy, would have gotten up and left. But that's not what happened. The gentleman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Anthony," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "And 3 nights ago, I had a strange dream." My heart stopped. "I dreamed that St. Kolbe told me to come to lunch at this restaurant today, that I would find a man reading a book about him, and that this man would help me understand something important." Shivers ran down my entire body. "Anthony," I asked, "what do you need to understand?" He took a deep breath. "My son died 6 months ago in a car accident. Since then, I've completely lost my faith. I can't pray anymore. I can't believe that God is good anymore." And there, in that noisy restaurant, with waiters passing by, the first miracle of my new mission happened, because I knew exactly what to say. It wasn't my words. It was as if St. Kolbe was speaking through me. "Anthony, Do you want to know where your son is now? He looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair. He is in the same place where St. Kolbe interceded for me on Tuesday. In the same place where your prayer this morning was heard. In the same place where your pain is being transformed into purpose. Tears streamed down his face. How can you be sure? He whispered. I took out my grandmother's handwritten prayer, which I now always carried with me. Because the dead don't stop loving, Anthony. They just love from a different place. I showed him my grandmother's handwriting. My grandmother died 10 years ago, but on Tuesday, she put this prayer in my wallet. Your son didn't die, Anthony. He just changed addresses. What happened next will make you understand why I'm absolutely sure that none of this is coincidence. Anthony took out his wallet, opened it, and showed a picture of his son. He was a young man of about 25 years old, with an open smile, bright eyes. This photo was taken 3 days before the accident, he said. Look where he was. The photo showed the young man in front of a church, and on his shirt, clearly visible, a St. Maximilian Kolbe button. We sat there in silence for several minutes, both crying, both knowing that we were experiencing something that went far beyond human comprehension. What should I do now? Anthony asked. The same thing I'm going to do, I replied. Tell your story, testify, help other parents who are going through the same pain. We became friends instantly, more than friends, brothers in mission, because that day I understood that St. Kolbe's visit hadn't been just for me. It had been the beginning of something much bigger. I left that lunch completely transformed. If I had any residual doubt about the reality of what had happened, now that doubt had completely evaporated. I went home that night and told my wife everything. She listened to me in silence. In the end, she took my hand and said, Michael, for years, I've prayed for you to find peace. I don't know how to explain what's happening, but I can see in your eyes that you have. In the following days, the signs multiplied impressively. A co-worker sought me out to tell me that she was going through a crisis of faith. Without me even mentioning St. Kolbe, she herself mentioned that she'd dreamt of a Franciscan saint the night before. A neighbor, who barely spoke to me, knocked on my door to return a book I'd never lent him. It was another biography of St. Kolbe. My youngest son, 8 years old, made a drawing at school and brought it home. It was a man in a brown habit extending his hand to a child. When I asked what it meant, he said, I don't know, Dad. I just felt like drawing it. Each sign was a confirmation. Each confirmation was an impetus to continue. And then Sunday arrived. I was at Mass, as always, but this time, truly present, no longer on autopilot. The priest announced he would offer a special prayer for everyone going through faith crises. When he said those words, my heart raced, and then he did something that left me breathless. He asked that everyone who had experienced the intercession of St. Maximilian Kolbe stand up. I looked around. Several people stood, many more than I imagined. And when I stood up too, the priest looked directly at me. After Mass, he called me over. My son, said Father John. For 2 weeks I've been dreaming of St. Kolbe. He tells me he has special work to do in this parish, and now, seeing you stand up, I understand you're part of that work. 2 weeks. Exactly the time that had passed since my crisis had begun to intensify. The priest told me that several parishioners had sought him out in recent weeks, reporting dreams of St. Kolbe, all with the same message. It was time to form a support group for people in faith crises. Would you like to lead this group? He asked. Me? Lead a group? I was still processing my own transformation, but then I remembered St. Kolbe's words. You will testify. You will help other men who are going through the same crisis. Yes, I replied. I accept. And that's how the St. Kolbe group of our parish was born. We started meeting once a week. There were only 5 of us at first. Anthony, myself, 2 ladies who had lost their husbands. and a young man questioning his vocation. Our first meeting was intense. Each person told their story. Each story seemed to connect with the others in impossible ways. Mrs. Mary had lost her husband in a workplace accident. The same week, my crisis began. Mrs. Rose was caring for a mother with Alzheimer's and felt abandoned by God. She had started praying specifically to St. Kolbe on the very day of my visit. Young Peter was unsure whether to become a priest or give up the seminary. He had found a medal of St. Kolbe on the street, on the Tuesday when everything changed for me. All the stories intertwined, all the pains connected, all the searches led to the same place. We understood that we weren't there by chance. We were being gathered for something specific, and St. Kolbe was orchestrating everything. Our group grew rapidly. In 2 months, we were 20 people. In 6 months, 40 people arrived saying they had dreamt of us before even knowing the group. Others said they had found our flyer in impossible places. A young woman said the group's flyer had appeared inside a book borrowed from the library, a book she had picked up randomly. A gentleman said he found our address written on a piece of paper in the pocket of a coat he hadn't worn in years. It was as if St. Kolbe were personally inviting each person. And the most impressive thing, the transformations that happened in the group were visible. People arrived broken and left renewed. They arrived hopeless and left full of purpose. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't psychology. It was something that went far beyond. It was the real presence of St. Kolbe among us, because in every meeting, inexplicable things happened. Medals appeared in people's pockets during prayer. Handwritten prayers appeared in bags that had been checked before the meeting. Photos of St. Kolbe were found in cars after the meetings. And the dreams multiplied. Almost every week, someone arrived saying that St. Kolbe had appeared during the night to give specific guidance. He appeared to comfort a grieving mother, to guide an unemployed father, to strengthen a betrayed wife. Each visit was unique. Each message was personalized. Each person received exactly what they needed, and all the messages had something in common. Continue in the group, continue witnessing, continue helping. Because that was the greater mission that St. Kolbe had entrusted to us. We weren't just a support group, we were a spiritual family, a living network of intercession, and the fruits began to spread beyond our meetings. Families reconciled, marriages were saved, young people found their vocations, elderly people regained the joy of living, all through the intercession of St. Kolbe, all through the testimony of those who had experienced his presence. Today, 3 years after that Tuesday that changed my life, our group has over 200 people spread across 5 different parishes. We receive letters from people in other states saying that St. Kolbe also visited them after hearing our testimonies. We have a website where we share stories. We have a weekly radio program. We have spiritual retreats that always have a waiting list. But none of this was planned. None of this was forced. Everything simply happened, as if St. Kolbe were planting seeds and taking care of them to grow at the right time. And I became a completely different person. The faith crisis, completely overcome. Not because my circumstances changed, but because my perspective changed. Now I understand that God never leaves. We are the ones who build walls, and when those walls get too high, He sends someone special to help us tear them down. For me, that someone was Saint Maximilian Kolbe, my family, completely transformed. My wife smiled again. My children see me as an example of faith. Our home became a place of peace. My work, I'm still an accountant, but now I use my profession to help people in financial difficulty, freely and anonymously, because I discovered that giving is the best way to receive, and that emptiness that consumed me, it was filled in a way I never imagined possible, because now I understand that the emptiness wasn't a problem. It was an invitation, an invitation to let God dwell within me more deeply, an invitation to become an instrument of His mercy, an invitation to discover that true happiness isn't found in having our prayers answered, but in becoming the answer to others' prayers. And you, listening now, you who might be facing the same crisis I've faced, I need to tell you something. Saint Kolbe didn't come to me because I was special. He came because I was broken, because I had hit rock bottom in my faith. And if you're at rock bottom right now, maybe that's exactly where you need to be, because it's at rock bottom that we stop looking sideways and start looking up. It's at rock bottom that we stop trying to solve everything alone and start accepting help. It's at rock bottom that our voice finally echoes loud enough to reach heaven. Maybe you'll never have a visit like the one I had. Maybe Saint Kolbe won't physically appear in your room, but I can guarantee you one thing. If you open your heart, truly, if you stop demanding signs and start noticing signs, if you let go of control and trust the process, you will experience His presence, uniquely, personally, unmistakably, because that's Saint Kolbe's specialty. He doesn't abandon those who need Him, even when you think you've been abandoned, even when you feel your prayers are hitting the ceiling, even when you're at your limit, especially when you're at your limit. Because it was at my limit that He found me. It was at my limit that my story changed. It was at my limit that I discovered God had never been closer. And today, whenever someone seeks me out in despair, whenever I receive a letter from someone in crisis, whenever I see someone in the group crying in desperation, I whisper a prayer to Saint Kolbe, and I ask him to do for that person exactly what he did for me. Because if there's one thing I've learned in these 3 years, it's that God never wastes a crisis. He transforms it into rebirth. He uses it as a bridge to miracles. He takes our deepest pain and transforms it into our most powerful ministry. That's what happened to me. And it can happen to you too. You just have to allow it. You just have to trust. You just have to believe that even on your darkest night, Saint Kolbe might be on his way with a specific message for you, with a mission designed especially for your life, with a love that will heal all your wounds and transform your crisis into the greatest miracle you've ever experienced. Because that's what he did for me. On the Tuesday when everything changed, in the early morning when faith returned, in the dream that awakened my soul and taught me that when God decides to act, He chooses the most broken hearts. To show that there is no pain His love cannot heal, no crisis His mercy cannot transform, no night His light cannot illuminate. And if you're in your night now, just wait. Saint Kolbe might be coming to visit you tonight.